The billionaire had everything a person could dream of, but at the same time, he had nothing, because inside his heart there was an emptiness that money could never fill. Every morning he would wake up in his giant mansion. Sunlight falling through the tall glass windows. Servants already busy preparing his breakfast. Yet when he sat at the long dining table, he always sat alone. The clinking of the silver spoon against the china plate was the only sound that kept him company. No laughter, no family chatter, only silence, and he had grown used to it. But deep down he longed for something more, something he once had and lost forever. People in the city called him the man with a golden touch. His businesses stretched across countries. His wealth doubled every year. Newspapers praised him. Other businessmen envied him. But whenever he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a powerful man. He only saw a lonely face, older than his years, eyes heavy with memories he could not forget. Years ago, life had been different. He had a wife who loved him deeply and a little daughter who was the light of his world. Her laughter echoed in the halls of this same mansion. Her tiny footsteps once raced across the marble floors. But fate was cruel. His wife fell ill and left this world too soon. And not long after, an accident separated him from his little girl too. That pain never left him. It sat in his chest like a stone he carried everywhere. At work, he wore a mask. He signed contracts, spoke confidently, and impressed investors. But the moment he came home, he took off that mask and the silence swallowed him again. His wealth could bring him the finest art, the rarest wines, the most expensive cars, but not the warmth of a hug, not the sound of a child calling him Papa, not the smile of his wife welcoming him at the door. These were things his money could never buy, and that truth hurt him more than anything. Sometimes at night, he would sit in his study, staring at an old family photo framed in gold, his wife holding their daughter, both smiling, while he stood proudly beside them. He would trace the glass with his fingers as if he could touch them again. But they remained only in the picture, frozen in time. The staff in the mansion respected him, but they never truly knew him. They only saw the serious, commanding man who rarely spoke. They didn't see the nights when he walked alone in the garden, hands in his pockets, eyes lifted to the stars, wondering if his loved ones could see him from somewhere above. He sometimes sat by the fountain where his daughter once played with paper boats. He remembered how she would giggle and clap when the water splashed her face, and he would close his eyes, listening hard, almost imagining he could hear her voice again. But when he opened his eyes, only silence remained. To the outside world, he looked untouchable, dressed in the finest suits, arriving at events in luxury cars, speaking with authority. But when the night came, he was just a man sitting in an empty room, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. He ate alone. He celebrated alone. Even his birthdays passed quietly with no one to surprise him. He didn't even bother cutting a cake, because who would clap for him, who would cheer, who would feed him the first bite? The servants would politely wish him, but their words were formal, not the heartfelt wishes of family. He had money in every bank, but no one to share a simple meal with. Sometimes his business friends invited him to parties, but he always left early. The sound of laughter from families, the sight of children running around, it was too much for him to bear. He envied the simple joy of a father holding his child's hand, or a husband dancing with his wife. He would return home, loosen his tie, and sit in his library surrounded by shelves of books. Yet even the books could not comfort him. His heart ached for real company, real love, not the fake smiles of business partners. The billionaire's nights were the hardest. He often lay in bed unable to sleep, his mind replaying the past, the hospital room where he held his wife's hand for the last time, the accident that stole his daughter from him. Questions haunted him. Could he have done something different? Could he have protected them? Could he have kept them safe? But life offered no answers, only memories. He sometimes cried quietly into his pillow, though no one ever saw those tears, because in the morning he always looked strong again. But inside, he was breaking a little more each day. Despite all his sorrow, a small part of him never stopped hoping. He told himself maybe one day life would surprise him. Maybe one day someone would walk into his life and bring light back into his home. He didn't know when or how, but he carried that faint hope like a candle in the dark. It was the only thing that kept him moving forward, and though he didn't realize it yet, destiny was already preparing something extraordinary for him, something that would change his lonely life forever. The mansion was large and quiet, filled with echoing halls and polished marble floors, but one morning, a new presence entered its doors. The billionaire had hired a new maid, a woman who carried herself with humility and respect. Her clothes were plain, her hands rough from years of hard work, yet her eyes showed kindness, and unlike many others who worked only for money, she worked with sincerity. She needed the job desperately, for she was a single mother, and by her side was her young daughter, a bright-eyed girl who clutched her mother's hand tightly when they first stepped inside the enormous house. The girl had never seen a place so grand. Her eyes grew wide as she looked at the tall ceilings, the chandeliers that sparkled like stars, and the endless hallways that seemed to stretch forever. To her, it was like stepping into a palace from a fairy tale. But she was shy. She kept close to her mother, her small shoes tapping softly against the shiny floors, afraid she might disturb something precious. The servants around looked at her curiously, some whispered, wondering why the maid had brought a child into the mansion. But the mother bowed her head politely and explained that she had no one else to care for her daughter. She promised the girl would not be a burden. At first, the billionaire hardly noticed them. His mind was always occupied with meetings, phone calls, and files stacked on his desk. He gave instructions to his staff but rarely paid attention to their lives. To him, maids came and went, just another part of the machinery that kept his mansion running smoothly. But something about this maid was different. She did her work quietly, never complained, and never asked for more than what was given. While other workers sometimes tried to take advantage of his wealth, she remained honest. She cleaned the rooms with care, cooked with dedication, and spoke gently to everyone. Her presence slowly added a new rhythm to the house. The little girl, however, could not stay unnoticed for long. Children have a way of breathing life into the coldest places, and soon her laughter echoed faintly in the corners of the mansion. She would play quietly in the garden while her mother worked, running after butterflies or sitting by the fountain, dipping her small fingers into the water. Sometimes she would sneak into the library, her curious eyes wandering over the shelves of books stacked higher than she could reach. She could not read many of the big words, but she loved to look at the pictures. She would sit on the carpet, lost in her own little world, and when the billionaire passed by, he sometimes caught a glimpse of her, sitting cross-legged with a book open in her lap, her face glowing with innocent wonder. At first, he simply ignored her, thinking she was just a child keeping herself busy. But as days passed, he began to notice how different the mansion felt with her presence. Before, the house was only filled with silence and the stiff footsteps of servants. But now, there was a softness, a small voice humming songs, tiny giggles drifting through the air, and it stirred something inside him, something he had buried long ago. The memory of his own daughter when she was small, the way she used to laugh in the same garden, the way her little hands once turned the pages of books in the same library. He tried to push the thought away, yet the resemblance was too strong to ignore. The maid often reminded her daughter to stay out of trouble, to not disturb the master of the house. She feared that if the girl annoyed him, she might lose her job, and without the job, they would have nowhere to go. But the billionaire never scolded, he only observed quietly from a distance. Sometimes, when he returned from work late at night, he would see the girl asleep on a small couch in the kitchen, a blanket wrapped around her, her mother still busy scrubbing the counters, and for reasons he could not explain, his heart softened. He felt a strange comfort just knowing that somewhere under his roof, there was someone so innocent, so pure, untainted by greed or ambition. One afternoon, as he sat in the garden with papers in his hand, the girl chased a butterfly near him. She stopped suddenly when she realized how close she had come. Her big eyes looked up at him nervously, as if she had broken a rule, but instead of frowning, he did something he had not done in years. He smiled, a small, genuine smile. The girl relaxed and gave a shy smile back before running off again, and that single moment lingered in his mind for the rest of the evening. He found himself thinking of her laughter even during his meetings the next day. The staff in the mansion began to notice the change. The master who once never paid attention now seemed less cold, less harsh. He no longer walked past everyone with a stern face. Sometimes he stopped to ask small questions. Sometimes he even paused to watch the little girl at play. Though he never said it aloud, it was clear that her presence was slowly melting the ice around his heart. Something the maid herself noticed too. She remained careful, keeping her daughter respectful and quiet. But she could sense that the billionaire no longer minded the child being there. In fact, perhaps he even welcomed it. The mansion that once felt like a museum was slowly changing. Its silence was broken by small, innocent sounds. Its empty halls carried the light steps of a child. And though the billionaire did not yet realize it fully, destiny had already begun weaving its threads, connecting the lonely man, the hard-working maid, and her daughter in ways that would soon reveal secrets buried in the past. The necklace had not yet appeared, but the story had already begun to take shape, one that would change all their lives forever. The days passed slowly, and the mansion, which once felt like a museum, began to carry a new kind of energy. The little girl's presence was no longer something small or hidden. Her laughter, her footsteps, her curious eyes, all of it seemed to breathe life into the quiet halls. She had a natural way of spreading warmth without even trying, and the billionaire, though he never admitted it out loud, began to notice her more and more each day. It was as if she had a key to unlock something he thought was lost forever inside his heart. The girl loved the garden the most. She would run across the grass with her tiny shoes, chasing the birds that flew away just before she could touch them. She picked flowers and made little crowns out of them. Sometimes she sat by the fountain and dipped her fingers in the water, laughing when it splashed her face. The sound of her giggle carried through the air and reached the balcony where the billionaire often sat with his papers. At first he pretended not to hear, but slowly he found himself lowering the papers just to watch her play. The way her eyes sparkled reminded him so much of his own daughter that it both comforted him and hurt him at the same time. One afternoon, he came back earlier than usual, tired from meetings. He walked through the library, and there, in the corner of the huge room, sat the little girl, her legs folded under her, a heavy book open in front of her. She could not read most of the words, but she was turning the pages carefully, staring at the colorful pictures. When she noticed him standing there, she gasped softly and shut the book quickly, as if she had done something wrong. She stood up nervously, her small hands clutching the edge of her dress. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, expecting him to be angry. But instead of scolding, the billionaire stepped forward, bent down slightly, and asked in a gentle tone he had not used in years, "Do you like books?" The girl looked at him with wide eyes, surprised that the great master of the house was speaking to her. She nodded shyly, and he gave a small smile. "Then read as many as you like. This library belongs to you too." Her face lit up with joy, and she whispered a soft thank you. Before sitting back down, from that day on, she spent more and more time in the library, and every time he passed by, he found himself slowing down, sometimes asking her about the pictures she was looking at, sometimes just watching her innocence. Something inside him was healing little by little. The maid noticed these changes but stayed quiet. She had never seen her master soften like this. She had worked in wealthy homes before, and most of the rich treated servants and their children as invisible. But here something unusual was happening. Her daughter was bridging a gap she didn't even understand. She often warned her child not to disturb the master. But the billionaire never seemed disturbed. In fact, he seemed calmer, gentler, whenever her daughter was near. The bond grew slowly, like a seed turning into a plant. One day in the garden, the girl was making a crown of flowers, carefully tying the stems together with her tiny fingers. The billionaire walked past, pretending he was simply taking a stroll. But she ran up to him suddenly, holding out the flower crown. "This is for you," she said, smiling brightly. For a moment he froze. No one had given him something so simple, so pure, in years. He bent down, took the crown, and placed it gently on his head. The girl laughed loudly, clapping her hands, and for the first time in a long time, he laughed too. Not the polite laugh he used for business partners, but a real, deep laugh that came from his heart. The servants nearby watched in shock, unable to believe what they were seeing. From then on, he began to include the girl in small moments of his life. Sometimes he brought her sweets when he returned from his office. Sometimes he read her a story at night, something he had once done for his daughter. She listened with shining eyes, hanging on every word, and when she asked innocent questions, he found himself answering with patience, even enjoying the conversations. In those moments, the billionaire felt human again. Not just a powerful man with endless wealth, but a fatherly figure, someone capable of love. There were evenings when he sat in the living room with the girl beside him, her small head resting against his arm as she dozed off. The maid would peek in quietly, her heart torn between fear and gratitude. Fear that the closeness might create problems one day, and gratitude that her daughter had found a kind of father figure. She herself had lived a hard life, struggling alone to raise her child, and to see the master of the mansion treating her girl with such affection filled her with emotions she could not put into words. The billionaire too was confused by his own feelings. He often asked himself why he allowed this child into his life, why her presence mattered so much. He told himself it was just because she reminded him of his lost daughter. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. She was bringing warmth into his cold world, something he had thought impossible. Every day he looked forward to seeing her, hearing her laugh, sharing small moments. Without even realizing it, he had begun to care deeply for her, as if destiny itself had placed her in his path. The mansion was changing with every passing day. What once was filled with emptiness now carried echoes of innocence, and while none of them knew it yet, this growing bond was leading them toward a revelation that would shake all their lives. The necklace had not yet been revealed, but the strings of fate were already pulling them closer to a truth that would soon leave the billionaire in tears. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of day when the air feels heavy with secrets. The billionaire had finished his work early and decided to walk through the garden. The flowers were in full bloom, and the fountain sparkled under the sunlight. As he moved slowly along the stone path, he noticed the little girl playing near the fountain. Her mother was busy in the kitchen, so the child had been left to entertain herself. She was humming softly, her small hands holding a doll made of cloth, her innocent world untouched by the troubles that weighed heavily on the billionaire's mind. He sat on a bench not far from her, pretending to read a newspaper, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. There was something about the way she laughed, the way she spoke to her doll as if it were alive, that made his heart ache with memories. His own daughter used to play in that very same spot, talking to her toys, making up stories, filling the air with joy. He leaned back, letting the sound of the child's laughter wash over him like a forgotten song. And for a moment he closed his eyes, almost believing that time had turned back, that his little girl was alive again, running and playing in his garden. The girl, lost in her play, twirled around the fountain, her dress fluttering in the breeze, and as she bent down to pick a flower, the neckline of her dress slipped slightly, revealing something that caught the billionaire's eyes instantly. It was a necklace, a small silver chain with a delicate pendant, shining under the sun. He froze, his hands trembling as the newspaper slid from his lap. His heart began to pound, because that necklace was not just any ornament. It was something he knew better than anyone else. It was the very same necklace he had once placed around his own daughter's neck years ago. He stood up slowly, unable to control the rush of emotions flooding through him. His voice cracked as he called out, "Where did you get this?" The girl stopped playing, startled by his sudden tone. She looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Her fingers instinctively touched the necklace as if protecting it. She did not understand why he was upset. She only knew that this necklace had always been hers, something her mother told her never to lose. She whispered softly, "It's mine. I've always had it." Her voice was confused, almost scared, because the man who had always been kind to her now looked shaken, his face pale, his hands trembling. The billionaire walked closer, his eyes fixed on the pendant, his mind spinning with memories. He remembered the day he had given that necklace to his daughter. It was her birthday, and his wife had suggested they create something special, a piece that would always connect them as a family. The necklace had been custom-made, with a tiny engraving on the back, an engraving only he knew, a secret mark of love. How could this little girl, the maid's daughter, be wearing it now? His voice broke again as he whispered, "This necklace, this belonged to my child." His knees weakened, and he almost collapsed onto the bench, covering his face with his hands as tears began to stream down. Emotions he had locked away for years poured out all at once. The girl stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She had never seen the strong man of the house cry. Her small heart felt heavy, and she took a timid step forward. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. But the billionaire shook his head, unable to answer. He was drowning in a sea of memories. The necklace had been lost with his daughter, or so he had believed. Seeing it here, around the neck of this child, was like seeing a ghost. His mind refused to accept it. Yet his heart screamed that this was no coincidence. There had to be a reason. There had to be a truth hidden behind this. The maid arrived just then, carrying a tray from the kitchen, and when she saw her master bent over in tears, staring at her daughter's necklace, her heart dropped. She rushed forward, setting the tray down quickly. "Sir, is everything all right?" she asked nervously, but deep inside she already knew what had happened. For years she had feared this moment, the day when the truth would come out. She had always told her daughter to keep the necklace safe, never to remove it. because she knew it carried a history she could not erase. Her hands shook as she reached for her daughter. But the billionaire stopped her with a look, his eyes red, his voice breaking as he asked again, "Where did she get this necklace?" The maid's lips trembled. She looked down at the ground, unable to meet his eyes. Silence hung heavy in the garden. The only sound was the trickling of the fountain. The billionaire's heart pounded harder, waiting for an answer. The maid finally whispered, her voice filled with guilt. "I cannot lie anymore. This necklace was not mine to give her. It belonged to her, long before she became my daughter." Those words pierced through him like lightning. His body shook as the meaning sank in. The maid had kept a secret tied to the very child he thought he had lost forever. The girl, still confused, clutched her mother's hand, not understanding why everyone looked so serious, why tears were in their eyes. She only knew the necklace was hers, a part of her since she could remember. The billionaire stared at the pendant again, his fingers itching to touch it, to turn it over and see the engraving, but he held back, because he feared what it might confirm, and yet he could no longer deny the storm in his heart. This was no ordinary child. This was no ordinary necklace. Fate had brought them together for a reason, and he could feel the truth pressing closer, a truth that would change everything. In that moment, the mansion, the wealth, the power, all of it faded into the background. Only the necklace mattered, only the child mattered, and as tears streamed down his face, the billionaire whispered again, softer this time, almost like a prayer, "Where did you get this?" And though the answer was not yet fully spoken, destiny had already begun to reveal its hand. The necklace was the key, and soon the past he thought was buried would come rushing back into his life. The air in the garden was heavy. The billionaire's question hung between them like thunder waiting to break. His eyes were fixed on the necklace, his heart beating fast, his hands trembling. The little girl held her mother's hand tightly, confused by the strange silence, while the maid stood frozen, knowing the moment she had feared for years had finally come. She could no longer hide, no longer pretend. The secret she carried in her heart was standing bare before her master, and there was no escape now. The billionaire's voice shook as he repeated, softer but sharper, "Tell me the truth. Where did she get this necklace?" His eyes were wet with tears, but his gaze was piercing, demanding an answer. The maid lowered her head, her lips trembling. She had always respected her master, always worked honestly. But this truth was heavier than any sin. She swallowed hard, her heart racing, and with a broken voice she whispered, "I must tell you everything, sir, the truth of how she came into my life." Years rolled back in her memory as she began to speak, her voice cracked with pain. "It was many years ago, a night I will never forget. There had been chaos, there had been screams, and in the middle of it all, I found a little girl, so small, so helpless. She was all alone, crying, her tiny hands clutching this necklace." She paused, tears filling her eyes as she remembered the scene. "I picked her up. I couldn't leave her there. I had no children of my own, no family. I thought God had sent her to me. I thought it was destiny. So I raised her as mine. I gave her food. I gave her love. I gave her everything I could. But I never took this necklace from her, because I knew it was not mine to take." The billionaire's hands covered his face as he listened, his body trembling with every word, his heart racing with memories of the night his own daughter disappeared. The pieces began to fit together, the accident, the confusion, the loss, and now this confession. His voice cracked as he asked, "You mean to say, this child, she is not your daughter?" The maid's tears fell freely. She clutched her child close, her voice breaking. "She is my daughter in love, sir, but by blood, no, she is not. I do not know who she truly belongs to, but I knew she was precious. I knew this necklace carried a story, and I feared one day someone would come searching. But I could never abandon her. I raised her with everything I had, even when I had nothing." The little girl looked up at her mother, her innocent eyes wide. She did not understand the weight of the words being spoken. She only knew that the woman who held her was her mother, the one who had cared for her since she could remember. She tugged at her hand and whispered, "Mama, why are you crying?" The maid bent down, kissed her forehead, and hugged her tightly, her heart breaking at the thought that her daughter's life might change forever, that the truth might take her away. The billionaire could not stop the tears that flowed down his face. He remembered the custom necklace, the engraving at the back, something only he and his late wife knew. He reached out with trembling fingers and gently turned the pendant over. And there it was, The mark, the secret sign of love. His heart shattered and healed at the same time. His voice broke into a sob as he whispered, "It is her, my daughter, my blood, my little girl." The weight of years of sorrow came crashing down on him. He cried openly, his strong shoulders shaking. His voice no longer that of a billionaire but of a broken father finding his child again. The maid fell to her knees, her hands folded, her voice filled with fear and pleading. "Please forgive me, sir. I never wanted to deceive you. I never wanted to take what was yours. I only wanted to give her life, to keep her safe. I raised her with all the love I had. I fed her when I had no food. I worked day and night so she could smile. I never thought this day would come. But if she is yours, if she belongs to you, I will not stand in the way." The billionaire looked at her through his tears, but instead of anger, his heart filled with gratitude. He saw not a thief, not a liar, but a woman who had saved his daughter when fate had nearly destroyed everything. She had raised her with love when he himself had been lost in grief. He stood up slowly, his voice soft but full of emotion. "You did not steal her. You saved her. When I could not, you gave her the love she deserved. When I was too broken to protect her. I can never hate you for that. I can only thank you." The maid sobbed harder. The little girl clung to her mother's arms, still too young to understand the storm of emotions swirling around her. The billionaire bent down and gently placed his hand on the child's head, his voice trembling. "You are my daughter. You have always been mine. I lost you once, but fate has brought you back to me." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in years, he felt whole. He felt the emptiness in his heart fill with warmth. The girl, though confused, felt safe in his embrace, and in that moment, she hugged him back, resting her tiny head against his chest, hearing the sound of a father's heartbeat. The garden was filled with silence, but it was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of destiny revealing itself. The truth had finally come out. The billionaire had found his lost daughter. The maid had released her long-kept secret, and a new chapter was waiting to begin, one that would bind them together in ways none of them could have imagined. The necklace had spoken, the past had returned, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night after the truth came out was unlike any other. The billionaire could not sleep. He sat alone in his study with the necklace in his hand, his fingers tracing the small engraving at the back again and again. His eyes swollen from crying, his mind filled with images of the past. Every detail he had locked away for years came rushing back with painful clarity. The sound of his wife's laughter, the sparkle in his daughter's eyes, the way she would run into his arms and wrap her tiny arms around his neck, all of it returned as if it had been waiting in the shadows of his heart. And now, seeing the necklace around the maid's daughter's neck had broken open a door he thought was sealed forever. He remembered the day he had given that necklace. It was a sunny morning. His daughter had just turned 4. His wife had insisted on a special gift, something no other child would have, and so he had ordered the necklace to be made, not from a store, but from his own design. A simple silver chain with a pendant engraved with a secret mark, a sign only he and his wife knew, a symbol of family, of love. He remembered the way his daughter's little fingers had played with it, her giggle when he clasped it around her neck. She had said it made her feel like a princess, and his wife had kissed him proudly, whispering that their daughter would always carry their love close to her heart. The memories were so vivid that tears blurred his eyes again. He whispered to himself, "It is her, it must be her." His heart broke and healed at the same time, because for years he had lived with the pain of losing her, of thinking she was gone forever. He had walked through life like a man with no soul, hiding behind wealth and power, and now destiny had returned her to him in the most unexpected way, through the maid who had raised her, through the necklace that had survived time and loss. Proof that love never truly disappears. The next morning, he walked into the garden where the girl was playing. The maid stood nearby, watching nervously, unsure of what the new day would bring. The billionaire bent down and looked into the child's eyes that shone with innocence and a spark he recognized all too well. "Do you know," he asked gently, his voice soft but full of emotion, "that this necklace was given to you by your real father long ago?" The little girl tilted her head curiously. She did not fully understand, but something in his eyes made her feel safe. She touched the pendant with her small fingers and whispered, "I've always had it. Mama said it's mine forever." The billionaire smiled through his tears. "Yes, it is yours forever, because it carries the love of those who brought you into this world." The maid's eyes filled with tears as she listened, her hands trembling. She had dreaded this moment, afraid that her daughter would be taken from her. But what she saw in the billionaire's face was not anger. It was love, deep and powerful. The love of a father reunited with his child. She lowered her gaze, grateful and broken at the same time, whispering silently to herself that she had done her duty. She had kept the girl safe until her true family found her again. The billionaire spent hours with the girl that day, showing her the old parts of the mansion, the rooms where she once played as a baby, the garden where she had taken her first steps. He opened a drawer and brought out old toys, tiny shoes, faded photographs, things he had kept all these years as memories of his lost daughter. When he showed them to the child, she looked at them with wide eyes, as if they were pieces of a puzzle she never knew existed. He pointed to a picture of himself, holding a baby girl in his arms, her mother beside him smiling. "That baby," he whispered, his voice shaking, "is you." The girl studied the picture closely, her small hands touching the glass. She looked at him, then at the picture, then back at him. Her innocent voice asked, "That's me?" He nodded with tears streaming down his cheeks. "Yes, my little one, that's you. I thought I had lost you, but God has brought you back to me." She blinked slowly, then stepped closer and hugged him, her tiny arms around his neck, and in that moment, years of pain melted away. He held her tightly, as if letting go would mean losing her all over again. As the days passed, the memories continued to surface. He remembered her first birthday, her first word, the way she used to fall asleep on his chest. He walked through the house with her, recalling every corner where she had once left traces of her childhood. Sometimes he would close his eyes and almost hear the echoes of the past overlapping with the present. It was overwhelming, but it was also healing. The mansion no longer felt like an empty shell. It was alive again, filled with the spirit of family, the way it had been before tragedy struck. The maid often stood quietly in the background, her heart torn in two. She had raised the girl as her own. She had been there for every scraped knee, every fever, every lullaby. And now she watched as the truth pulled the child closer to her real father. She feared that she might lose her. But the billionaire never let her feel unwanted. He often told her, "Without you, she would not be alive. Without you, she would not be the kind and bright girl she is today. You are part of her life. And nothing will erase that." His words soothed her heart. Though the ache remained, she knew he spoke the truth. She knew he valued her sacrifice. Late one night, as he sat by his daughter's bed, watching her sleep, the billionaire whispered to himself, "I thought I had lost everything, but life has given me a second chance." He stroked her hair gently, promising silently that he would never let her out of his sight again, that he would make up for every lost year, every tear, every lonely night. The memories of the past no longer haunted him the same way, because now, with his daughter back in his arms, they were no longer just memories of pain. They were pieces of a story that had found its missing chapter. The necklace had been the key, but it was love that bound them, love that had survived distance, loss, and time. And as the billionaire closed his eyes, he knew the past was no longer only a wound. It was also a reminder of how precious the present was, and how hopeful the future could be. The mansion that once stood like a palace of silence now began to feel alive again. The truth had been revealed, the necklace had spoken. And the billionaire no longer looked at the little girl as just the maid's daughter. He looked at her as his own blood, his lost child returned by fate. He could not hide his emotions anymore. He wanted the world to know that this was his daughter, the piece of his heart he thought he would never see again. And from that moment on, he treated her not as a guest in his house, but as family. The servants noticed the change immediately. The man who once walked past them coldly now had a softer look on his face. His footsteps no longer echoed with the weight of loneliness. Instead they carried warmth, and at the center of it all was the little girl. She followed him around, asking innocent questions, making him laugh with her simple thoughts, and he welcomed it. He answered her. He held her hand when they walked through the garden. He even lifted her onto his lap during meals. Something that shocked the staff, for no one had ever seen the billionaire share his table so openly with anyone. One evening, as the sun painted the sky orange, the maid stood at a distance watching her daughter play with the billionaire near the fountain, her heart heavy with mixed emotions. She had raised this child through hunger, through nights of fever, through years of struggle, and now she watched as the girl called another man Papa. The word that had never been spoken in her small house, the word she had never heard from her daughter's lips. A part of her heart ached, afraid she was losing her child, But another part of her felt peace, because she knew the girl was with the man who had been searching for her all his life, the man who had the right to call her his own. The billionaire noticed the maid's silence. One night he called her into his study, his voice calm, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You must not think I will take her away from you," he said softly. "You gave her life when fate tried to steal it. You raised her with love when I was broken. You are part of her story, and nothing can change that." The maid lowered her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered, "I only wanted her to be safe, sir. I feared this day, but now I see it was always meant to come. I do not want to lose her, but I know she belongs with you." The billionaire walked closer and placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "We will not be two families. We will be one. You will stay here. You will always be in her life, because she needs you as much as she needs me." Those words lifted a burden from her heart. She realized he was not trying to erase her. He was trying to honor her, and for the first time she allowed herself to breathe freely. Her daughter would not have to choose between them. She would have both, the mother who raised her and the father who had found her again. The little girl, unaware of the weight of these conversations, continued to live her days in joy. She loved the attention, the new clothes her father bought her, the toys that filled her room. But more than that, she loved the bond she shared with both her mother and her newfound father. Sometimes she would fall asleep in her mother's lap, sometimes in her father's arms, and neither of them complained, because both knew she was the bridge that united them. The mansion itself began to transform. Where once only silence echoed, now there were sounds of laughter, footsteps running across the halls, the clinking of dishes as the three of them shared meals together. Even the servants felt lighter. They smiled more. They whispered to each other about how their master had changed, how the house no longer felt like a prison of wealth but like a home. And all because of one small child and the necklace she carried. One special evening, the billionaire decided to hold a small dinner in honor of his daughter's return. Not a grand party filled with strangers, but an intimate gathering with only those close to him. He stood up during the meal, his voice strong but filled with emotion. "For years I lived in darkness, thinking I had lost the most precious part of my life. But fate has returned her to me. Tonight I want you all to know, this girl is my daughter, my blood, my heart, and I will spend the rest of my days giving her the love she deserves." His words moved everyone. The maid lowered her head, crying silently. The servants clapped softly, and the little girl looked up at him, not fully understanding the weight of his speech, but smiling proudly, because she knew he loved her. That night, after the guests left, the billionaire sat with his daughter by the fireplace. She rested her head against his arm, holding her doll in one hand and the necklace in the other. He stroked her hair and whispered, "I will never let you go again." She looked up sleepily and said, "Promise?" And he kissed her forehead, whispering, "I promise." In that moment, the house that had once been filled with sorrow finally felt whole. The circle of family had been broken for years, but now it was complete again. The maid, watching from the doorway, felt her heart swell with pride and relief. She had feared this truth for so long, but now she saw the beauty of it. Her daughter was not being taken from her. She was being given more love, more family, more protection. The life she had always dreamed of for her child was finally here, and she whispered a prayer of thanks, not for herself, but for the little girl who had brought two worlds together. From that day forward, they were no longer just a wealthy man, a maid, and her daughter. They were a family, bound by blood, bound by love, bound by destiny, and every smile, every laugh, every meal they shared became proof that sometimes life, no matter how cruel it once seemed, could still give back what it had taken, and even more. The days that followed were different from anything the billionaire had known for years. His mansion, once cold and filled with silence, now echoed with laughter, with the sound of running footsteps, with the soft voice of a child calling him Papa, a word he had longed to hear for so many lonely nights. The emptiness that had haunted him for years began to fade, replaced by warmth, by hope, by the simple joys of family, things his money had never been able to buy, but destiny had finally returned to him. Every morning now felt alive. He no longer sat at the long dining table in silence. Instead, the little girl would sit beside him, swinging her legs as she ate, asking questions about everything she saw, sometimes spilling milk, sometimes giggling at her own jokes, and instead of irritation, he felt happiness, the kind of happiness that filled his heart so deeply that tears sometimes came to his eyes without warning. He would glance at the maid, who sat quietly at the far end, her eyes full of gratitude, and he would nod to her, silently thanking her for raising his daughter when he could not. The garden too was no longer just a place of memories. It became a place of new beginnings. Every afternoon, the billionaire and his daughter would walk there together. She would run ahead, showing him flowers, chasing butterflies, holding his hand tightly whenever she grew tired. He had once walked those same paths alone with heavy steps, but now his steps felt light, as if the weight of years had been lifted from his shoulders. Sometimes he even found himself laughing loudly, his voice echoing in the open air, surprising even the servants who had never seen their master smile so freely. The maid, though still carrying humility in her heart, began to feel at home in the mansion. She no longer feared losing her daughter, because the billionaire had made it clear again and again that they were one family now. He respected her, treated her with honor, never forgetting the sacrifices she had made. Often he told her, "You gave her love when I could not. You gave her strength when I was broken. I will always be grateful to you." And she would bow her head, unable to stop the tears. That filled her eyes, for she had never imagined a life where her child would have so much love and protection. The little girl thrived in this new world, her days filled with learning, playing, and exploring. The billionaire brought her tutors, but also spent his own time teaching her things he had once dreamed of teaching his daughter long ago. He showed her how to read from the books in his library, how to plant seeds in the garden, how to paint simple pictures, and every time she smiled, he felt his heart heal a little more. He realized that true wealth was not in the gold and diamonds locked in his safes, but in the laughter of his child, in the peace of knowing his family was together again. One evening, the three of them sat by the fireplace, the flames dancing warmly, the little girl curled up with her doll, resting against her father's chest, the maid sitting nearby, sewing quietly. The billionaire looked at them both and whispered, "I once thought my life was over. I once thought I had lost everything. But God has given me a second chance, and this time I will not waste it." The maid smiled softly, nodding, while the girl, half asleep, whispered, "Promise, Papa?" He kissed her forehead and said gently, "I promise, my little one, I will never leave you again." The mansion staff noticed that the house itself seemed to change. Where once there was coldness, now there was warmth. Where once there was silence, now there was life. The halls echoed not just with footsteps but with laughter. Even the air seemed lighter. They whispered among themselves that fate had finally softened their master's heart, and they too felt happier serving a home that was truly alive. In the city, people began to notice a change in the billionaire as well. He no longer walked with the stiff, cold air of a man carrying only power. He now smiled more, he spoke gently, he even gave more to charity, building schools, hospitals, and homes for children without families. Perhaps because he knew better than anyone what it meant for a child to be lost, and what it meant for a child to be found again. His story became one of inspiration, a reminder that even the richest man in the world could be poor without love, and even the loneliest heart could find joy again. For the little girl, life became a fairy tale. She had her mother's love and her father's protection. She never felt the hunger or fear her mother had once struggled through. She grew up knowing she was cherished. She grew up with the sound of laughter instead of silence, and with every passing day, the bond between the three of them grew stronger, unbreakable, built on sacrifice, fate, and love. And so, the story that began with tears, with loss, with loneliness, ended with hope, with family, with joy. The necklace that had once been a symbol of pain became the bridge that reunited a father with his child. It remained around her neck, not just as a piece of silver, but as a reminder of love that survived time, distance, and tragedy, a reminder that miracles happen when least expected. The billionaire, once the loneliest man in the world, now ended his nights with a daughter sleeping peacefully under his roof and a heart full of gratitude. He knew that life had broken him once, but it had also given him a chance to rise again, and as he looked at his daughter and the woman who had saved her, he whispered a final silent prayer, thanking destiny for giving him what he had thought was gone forever, a family, a home, and a reason to live again.